My name is William Stanton. I'm 70 years old. For 40 years, I worked as a structural engineer in Chicago, calculating load-bearing walls and stress points to ensure the foundations I built were rock solid. I applied that exact same logic to my family. I spent my entire adult life making sure my wife, Deanne, and our son, Matthew, had an unbreakable foundation. I used to think the quiet life we built was impenetrable. I was wrong. The strength of a foundation depends entirely on the materials you use, and I had no idea that the people I loved most were rotting from the inside out. If you've ever felt that sickening pit in your stomach when someone you completely trusted shows you their true colors, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of this story, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from today. Knowing I'm not talking into the void brings this old man a little comfort. This nightmare started on a cold Tuesday in November. That was the day we laid Deanne to rest. She was 68. We had been married for 45 years. She was a brilliant woman who worked as a senior administrative assistant, handling highly classified accounts for the billionaire founder of Caldwell Investments, Vincent Caldwell. Deanne handled high-pressure corporate affairs with absolute grace, all while keeping our home perfectly anchored. 2 days ago, she collapsed on our kitchen floor. The paramedics said it was a sudden, massive cardiac event. 1 second she was pouring coffee, the next my entire world shattered. Grief became a physical weight, crushing my chest. I was running on autopilot, moving like a ghost through the funeral preparations. I was standing in our hallway in a stiff black suit, waiting for the funeral procession to arrive. The house was painfully quiet. That's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't recognize the unknown private number, but I answered anyway. It was Vincent Caldwell. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't use that soft, sympathetic tone everyone else was using. His voice was sharp, urgent, and laced with pure fear. "William," he said, his breathing shallow, "I'm sorry to call you on a day like today, but I found something in Deanne's security files. You need to get to my office right now." I leaned against the hallway wall, rubbing my tired eyes. "Vincent," I whispered, "we're burying her in an hour. I can't leave." "I know," he interrupted, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, "but this can't wait. Something terrible has happened. William, listen to me carefully. Do not tell your son where you're going. Don't tell your daughter-in-law either. You may be in danger. Just get through the service, then come straight to me." Before I could ask him what he meant, he hung up. The line went dead. My hands started to shake. Danger? Why would I be in danger? Why would Vincent warn me to watch out for my own son? I stared at the dark screen of my phone, a deep dread pooling in my stomach. The structural integrity of my life had just cracked. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked out to face the funeral, carrying a secret that was about to blow my entire family apart. When I stepped onto the porch, the cold wind hit me, but it was nothing compared to the chill spreading through my veins. I climbed into the back of the black sedan, staring blankly at the rain on the tinted windows, bracing myself for the hardest day of my life. The rain in Chicago that afternoon felt like shards of ice against my skin. It was one of those gloomy, gray November days where the sky hangs so low it feels like it might crush you. The cemetery was a sea of black umbrellas dotted across the bright green grass around an open grave. The priest was reading from a small leather-bound book, his steady, monotone drone almost drowned out by the sound of freezing rain hitting the canopy above our heads. I stood at the very edge of the plot, looking down at the polished mahogany casket holding my wife of 45 years. My body felt numb. I was frozen in place, feeling the weight of my 70 years pressing down on my tired shoulders, but my mind wasn't on the priest's words. My brain was racing, replaying Vincent Caldwell's chilling warning over and over. "You may be in danger. Do not tell your son." I slowly shifted my gaze from the casket, looking past the open grave toward Matthew. My 35-year-old son stood there in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Matthew is a senior financial planner. He makes a fortune advising wealthy clients on how to grow and protect their assets. He is smooth, well-spoken, and always projects an image of being in total control. Standing next to him was Sarah, my 33-year-old daughter-in-law. She owns a high-end fashion boutique downtown, a vanity project that is always losing money, yet somehow lets her rub elbows with the right social circles. She wore a chic black designer dress, an outfit that looked more suited for a fashion gala than a muddy cemetery. Under normal circumstances, I would look at them and see my family, my support system, the people who were supposed to hold me up in my darkest hour. But Vincent's words had planted a toxic seed of doubt in my mind, so I watched them. I stared at them, and what I saw sent a jolt of paranoid ice straight down my spine. They weren't crying. There wasn't a single tear in their eyes. Matthew's face was completely indifferent, even a little bored. His jaw was tight, and his eyes kept scanning the crowd, evaluating the guests, sizing up the wealthy clients and company partners who had come to pay their respects to Diane. He was networking at his own mother's funeral. Sarah was worse. She held an elegant black umbrella over them, leaning tightly into Matthew. I watched her lips whispering quickly, frantically. She nudged him with her elbow, her eyes narrowed into slits with a sharp, desperate intensity. Matthew frowned and snapped back at her without even looking at her, his expression tight with impatience. This wasn't the body language of a grieving son and a supportive wife. This was the body language of two people arguing over a deadline, two people feeling immense anxiety about something completely unrelated to the woman being lowered into the dirt. My stomach cramped. A structural engineer learns early to look for the hairline fractures. Those tiny cracks in a concrete column often tell you that the whole building is about to come down. Matthew and Sarah were full of cracks. I tried to refocus on the service, to give Diane the respect and attention her final moments on Earth deserved. But my gaze was pulled back to Sarah. She had stopped whispering to Matthew and was staring straight at me. No, she wasn't looking at my face. She was locked onto the inside breast pocket of my heavy wool winter coat. My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly what was in that pocket. When the paramedics took Diane away, I had found her key ring on her nightstand. Diane was an incredibly meticulous woman. She managed sensitive, highly classified financial records for Caldwell Investments. She kept a small, fireproof biometric safe hidden deep in the back of her home office closet. Inside was emergency cash, critical legal documents, and a black leather ledger she used to track off-the-books accounts for Vincent. She always told me that if anything ever happened to her, I had to secure that safe immediately. I had taken her master keys, including the small, heavy brass key used for the manual override of the safe, and tucked them deep inside my coat pocket. Sarah's eyes were locked on that exact spot. I could see the naked, hungry calculation in her gaze. She leaned into Matthew again and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod in my direction. Matthew followed her gaze, his eyes landing on my coat. In less than a second, his perfect mask slipped. I saw a flash of raw, desperate greed. It was an expression I had never seen on my son's face, and it terrified me. The priest finished his prayer and closed the book. People began to step forward, dropping single white roses into the casket. The rhythmic thud of the flowers hitting the wood echoed through the quiet cemetery. Matthew and Sarah walked toward me. The transition was instant and seamless. Sarah's face twisted into a mask of extreme grief. She wrapped her free arm around my shoulders, pressing her damp cheek tightly against mine. "Oh, William," she sobbed, loud enough for the guests around us to hear. "I'm just so devastated. We're going to get through this together. We're all here for you." Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't been watching her just moments ago, if Vincent hadn't warned me, I might have truly fallen into her arms. But as she hugged me, I felt her hand slide down my back. I felt her fingers brush the surface of my coat, seemingly casually, but deliberately grazing the inner pocket where the keys were kept. She was checking to see if they were still there. I went rigid, fighting the urge to shove her away. I forced myself to pat her back. "Thank you, Sarah," I said in a gravelly voice that sounded hollow and aged. Matthew stepped up right after, placing a firm, heavy hand on my shoulder. He looked me straight in the eyes, perfectly mirroring my grief. "Dad," he said, his voice dripping with practiced emotion, "you aren't alone. We're going home now, and Sarah and I are taking care of everything. You don't need to worry about a single detail today. We've already handled it all." I looked at this boy I had raised with my own hands, this man I had paid to put through business school, this son I had loved unconditionally. But all I saw was a stranger. A stranger desperate to take over my house and my wife's belongings. "I'm just so tired, Matthew," I said, playing the role of the broken, exhausted widower. "I think I just want to go home and lie down." "That's perfect," he replied smoothly. "We'll drive you. You shouldn't be driving right now. Let us handle the house." I nodded, letting my shoulders slump. I turned and walked toward the waiting black sedan, the freezing rain soaking through my hair. The drive home was suffocating. The silence in the car was heavy, thick with hidden agendas. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I caught Sarah frantically texting on her phone. Matthew's eyes were locked on the road, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so hard. The heat in the car was blasting, but I felt bone-chillingly cold. When we pulled into the driveway of the colonial-style home where Diane and I had lived for 30 years, a fresh wave of grief threatened to pull me under. This was our sanctuary. This was where we hosted Thanksgiving dinner, where we decorated countless Christmas trees, where we lived a life I thought was built on truth and love. Now, looking at those dark windows, it felt like a crime scene waiting to happen. Matthew killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "Dad," he turned to face me, his voice switching back to that sickeningly sweet tone. "You go straight upstairs and rest. Sarah will make you some tea in the kitchen. I'm going to go to Mom's office and start sorting through the paperwork that needs immediate attention. We have to handle their billing before the funeral home closes today." The lie was woven so smoothly, so perfectly, that my blood ran cold. He couldn't wait even 1 minute. He wanted to rush into that office the second he stepped through the front door. "Okay, son," I muttered, keeping my eyes down, playing the part he expected me to play. "Thank you." I stepped out into the freezing rain, my hand brushing my chest, feeling the hard outline of the keys in my pocket. The battle had officially begun. I had spent a lifetime building a foundation of trust, believing that blood meant absolute loyalty, but true evil doesn't always kick down the door with a weapon. Sometimes it sits at your kitchen table, smiling, waiting for you to close your eyes. I lost the woman I loved to the boy we raised, but I refused to let her memory be buried under their lies. Greed is a poison that corrodes the human soul from the inside. Always trust your gut, because the most dangerous predators are the ones who make you believe you are completely safe. If this story opened your eyes, please like and subscribe so you don't miss the truth. Have you ever discovered a dark secret hidden by someone you loved and trusted? I'm reading all your comments below. Share your story and let's expose the truth together. The ride back from the cemetery felt like a funeral procession for my own soul. The rain lashed against the windows, but the chill inside the car was worse. Matthew and Sarah sat across from me, the silence between them thick with heavy expectation. As the tires crunched over our gravel driveway, Matthew unbuckled his seatbelt. He stepped out into the freezing downpour and jogged toward the porch, leaving me behind. Sarah followed close behind, her heels clicking sharply against the wet stone. I followed them, leaning on my cane, playing the part of the grieving widower. The house was dark, cold, and stifling. The scent of Diane's lavender perfume still lingered in the foyer, a painful reminder of the life that had been ripped away from me 48 hours ago. Matthew didn't take off his soaked coat. He turned to me, a mask of concern on his face. "Dad, you need to lie down," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It's been an exhausting day. Sarah will get you some tea in the kitchen. I'm going to head upstairs and organize Mom's desk. The probate attorney needs her files and we can't afford to wait." He didn't wait for me to answer. He took the stairs 2 at a time, vanishing into the shadows of the second floor. Sarah gave me a tight smile and disappeared into the kitchen. The sound of running water masked the silence. I stood in the hallway, my heart hammering. Diane's home office was strictly off-limits to everyone in the house. She handled confidential portfolios for Caldwell Investments and guarded that room like a fortress. She kept the door locked at all times. Matthew knew this. Everyone knew this. I gripped my cane until my knuckles turned white. Something was definitely wrong. I didn't go to my bedroom. I walked silently up the stairs, placing my feet carefully on the edges to avoid making the old wood creak. When I reached the second-floor landing, the door to Diane's office was wide open. The heavy brass lock had been forced. The wood around the strike plate was splintered. I pressed my body flat against the hallway wall, held my breath, and peered around the doorframe. What I saw made my blood run completely cold. The room had been thoroughly violated, treated like an abandoned warehouse. Diane was an incredibly orderly woman. Her desk was always pristine, her files meticulously labeled and locked away. Now, drawers were pulled out and tossed onto the hardwood floor. Confidential bank statements, tax returns, and client portfolios were scattered everywhere like garbage. Standing in the center of the chaos was my only son. Matthew was frantically digging through a stack of manila folders, his eyes red, his breathing short and rapid. He threw empty folders over his shoulder, muttering vicious words under his breath. He walked to the tall mahogany bookshelf, pulled out thick binders, and shook them violently to see if anything would fall out. He wasn't looking for any probate documents. He was conducting a brutal search for something specific, something incredibly valuable and buried deep. He knelt on the floor, shoving his hands under the lip of the desk, feeling for a hidden compartment. He looked incredibly desperate, almost manic in his destructive search. I watched the boy I had raised with my own hands, the son I had paid to put through business school, violating his mother's sanctuary before her body was even cold. The taste of that betrayal was like ash in my mouth. I gripped the handle of my cane, ready to walk into that ruined room and demand an explanation. I was ready to unleash every ounce of a father's rage. I wanted to grab him by his expensive suit and throw him out of my house. I took a deep breath, preparing to step out of the shadows. But before my foot crossed the threshold, a violent vibration hit my chest. My phone started buzzing aggressively in my coat pocket, dangerously close to the safe key. In the quiet hallway, the sound was deafening. Matthew froze. He stopped searching through the scattered files and slowly turned his head toward the open door, his deep eyes narrowing with intense suspicion. I immediately retreated into the darkness of the hallway, quickly slipping back to my bedroom. I slid into the room, closed the door silently behind me, and pulled the phone from my pocket. The caller ID was a private number. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. I pressed answer, held the cold device to my ear, and forced my breathing to be as shallow as humanly possible. "Hello," I whispered. "William," a voice said. It was sharp, authoritative, and carried a clear, underlying current of impossible fear. It was Vincent Caldwell, Diane's billionaire boss, the man she had dedicated 20 years of her career to. "Vincent." I breathed, confused and lost. "We just got back from the cemetery. I can't talk about work right now." "I'm not calling about work, William," Vincent interrupted, his voice dropping to a gravelly, urgent whisper. "I'm calling because I found something. I was reviewing Diane's digital security footprint an hour ago. Something terrible has happened. You need to get to my office right now. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room spinning slightly. Vincent, what are you talking about? What did you find? Listen to me very carefully, Vincent said, enunciating every word. Do not tell your son where you're going. Do not tell your daughter-in-law either. Make up an excuse. Tell them you're going to the pharmacy. Tell them you need a rest. I don't care what excuse you use. Leave that house immediately. You may be in very real danger. The line cut out completely. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over my bedroom. I put the phone down, staring at the black screen. Danger. Vincent Caldwell, a man who could move millions of dollars with a single phone call, a man who never panicked, was terrified, and he was telling me to watch out for my own son. I slowly stood up and walked quietly to the mirror hanging over the oak dresser. I looked at my own reflection. I looked at the deep lines of grief carved around my mouth, the exhaustion in my eyes. I looked like a frail, broken old man ready to wither away. This pathetic image was exactly what Matthew and Sarah were counting on to carry out their plan. They thought I was completely blind, gullible, and so consumed by grief that I wouldn't notice the frantic searching going on in the next room. They were dead wrong. I am an engineer. When I find a crack in the foundation, I don't ignore it. I dig until I find the exact source of the rot. I tucked my phone securely back into my coat pocket, my trembling fingers brushing against the heavy, cold, solid brass outline of Diane's safe key. I took one very slow, deep breath, brutally burying that crushing grief deep inside my aching chest, exactly where those two traitors would never see it. I wiped my damp face, straightened my tired body, and silently opened the wooden bedroom door, fully prepared to play the role of the slow, helpless old fool. I stepped out of the bedroom, leaning heavily on my wooden cane. I dragged my right foot across the hardwood floor, ensuring my footsteps sounded exactly like the shuffling gait of a broken man. My heart was pounding from Vincent Caldwell's call, but I forced myself to slow my breathing. I let my shoulders slump forward, wearing the mask of a widower lost in sorrow. As the afternoon storm raged outside the window, the hallway seemed incredibly long, shadows stretching across the walls. As I neared Diane's office, I heard the frantic rustling of paper. Matthew was tearing through her life, searching for whatever secrets she had locked away. I pushed the heavy office door open, letting it creak loudly on its brass hinges. Matthew gasped, abruptly jerking up from behind Diane's desk where he'd been kneeling. In his frantic movement, he shoved a thick red folder behind his back, shielding it from view. His face was betrayed, beads of sweat glistening across his forehead. Even with the cold draft blowing through the room, for that single second, he looked like a wild animal cornered, until that polished, perfect mask slid back into place. He straightened up, forcing a stiff, unnatural smile. "Dad," he said, his voice a notch higher than usual, "you startled me. I thought you were resting upstairs." I stood in the doorway, letting my hands tremble against my cane. I swept my gaze across the room, letting my eyes widen in simulated shock. The floor was buried in files that Diane had kept meticulously organized. Her locked filing cabinet had been pried open, the metal tracks twisted and mangled. The velvet chair she used to sit in was overturned. I looked at my son, letting my voice shake with confusion and hurt. "Matthew," I stammered, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "What are you doing here? Your mother never let anyone inside this office. What's going on with all these papers?" Matthew took a slow, calculated step forward, keeping his left hand firmly behind his back, white-knuckling that hidden folder. He held out his empty hand, using that smooth, condescending tone professionals reserve for agitated clients. "Dad, just listen," he said slickly, his deep eyes locking onto mine with an unsettling intensity. "I know this looks bad. I know Mom was protective of her workspace, but I was just trying to help you. I was looking for her life insurance policy." I blinked, tilting my head as if struggling to process his words. "Her life insurance policy," I repeated weakly. "Yes, Dad," he continued, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "Sarah and I were talking about it in the car back from the cemetery. We know how much pressure you're under right now. We don't want you worrying about any financial burdens. We want to take care of the entire funeral, the casket, the burial plot, and all the hospital bills from when she collapsed. We just needed her insurance documents to get the process started and take the weight off your shoulders." It was a masterpiece of a lie. It was exactly the kind of excuse a loving, devoted son would use. If I hadn't seen him practically tearing the room apart, if I hadn't heard the warning from Vincent Caldwell, I might have fallen for it completely. But as a structural engineer, I know exactly how to spot a flawed, brittle support beam. Matthew didn't want to help. He wanted unrestricted access to Diane's private accounts. He was using the guise of filial duty to completely isolate me from my own wife's estate. He was trying to pull the wool over my eyes. Before I could even form a response, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway behind me. Sarah rushed into the room, coming to a sudden stop right next to me. She glanced at the ransacked office, then at Matthew. A silent exchange passed between them, pure panic, immediately replaced by a synchronized strategy. Sarah let out a dramatic sob. She covered her mouth with both hands, her shoulders shaking violently. She lunged forward, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck and burying her face in my chest. "Oh, William," she wailed, her voice muffled against my suit jacket. "It's just so hard to be in this house without her. Every corner reminds me of Diane. Matthew is just trying to be strong for all of us. He just wanted to make sure you didn't have to deal with these terrifying papers right now. We love you so much, William." She squeezed me tighter, her perfume overwhelming my senses. It was a cloying, expensive scent that made my stomach turn. I stood there, trapped in the hug of a woman who, moments ago, had been staring at my coat pocket like a common thief looking for a safe key. I could feel those cold, hard brass keys pressing against my ribs, a grim reminder of the truth hidden beneath their nauseating sweetness. I raised my trembling hands and patted Sarah's back, forcing myself to play along. "Thank you, Sarah," I whispered, letting my voice crack with feigned emotion. "You two are truly too good to an old man. I'm just completely overwhelmed by all of this. Without her, this house feels so empty." Matthew finally swung his left hand around and slipped the red folder into a briefcase sitting on the desk. He stepped over, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, joining the grotesque performance of family unity. "We know, Dad," Matthew said softly. "That's exactly why you need to let us handle this. You shouldn't be dealing with bankers or lawyers right now. You need time to grieve. Go back to your room and rest. Sarah will make you a cup of hot tea to calm your nerves. I'll get this place cleaned up and lock the door so nobody bothers Mom's things anymore." I nodded slowly, looking at the floor, appearing completely defeated. "Yes," I muttered. "Yes, you're right. A cup of tea sounds good. I'll go lie down." I turned, leaning heavily on my cane, and started moving slowly down the hall. My back was exposed, but every nerve in my body was vibrating with hypervigilance. I had seen the folder. I had heard the lie. I felt the absolute hypocrisy in Sarah's embrace. They thought they had successfully manipulated a grieving, fading, demented old man. They thought their seamless lies had covered their tracks perfectly. But the moment I walked back into my bedroom and quietly closed the door behind me, all the pretense vanished. My hands stopped shaking. My posture straightened. The sadness in my eyes hardened into cold, solid steel. Vincent Caldwell had warned me that my life was in danger. Seeing my son and daughter-in-law working in perfect coordination to ransack my wife's confidential files confirmed it. They were hunting for a massive target, something hidden deep within Diane's financial records, and they were using the tragedy of her sudden passing as the perfect smoke screen to steal it right from under my nose. I would never let that happen. Time crawled by like a slow-motion execution. I stayed in my bedroom until the late autumn afternoon faded into a dark, stormy night. The cold rain continued to lash against my window pane, creating a rhythmic pounding. Tonight, the relentless storm outside sounded like an approaching warning. Downstairs, the low, steady buzz of Matthew and Sarah's voices drifted up through the floorboards. Their tone was hushed, urgent, and constant. I sat motionless in the armchair in the corner of the room, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, staring hard at the closed bedroom door. I'd spent my entire career evaluating complex stress indicators and structural thresholds. I knew exactly how much physical pressure a support beam could withstand before it shattered into pieces. And now, my own flesh and blood were testing the absolute limits of my psyche. They mistakenly believed I was sitting there collapsing under the weight of immense grief, completely paralyzed by Diane's sudden passing. They were boldly counting on my perceived frailty to execute the next phase of their precision operation. I listened carefully as heavy footsteps finally started to climb the wooden stairs. The steps were too light to be Matthew. It was Sarah. I quickly slumped forward in the leather chair, burying my face in my hands, deliberately practicing my breathing to make it sound ragged and shallow with pain. The brass doorknob turned slowly, letting out a sharp metallic click. "William," a soft, incredibly gentle voice floated in from the darkened doorway. "Are you awake?" I slowly lifted my heavy head, letting my eyes flutter as if I were struggling to focus my failing vision. Sarah stepped gracefully into the dim, ambient light of the quiet, secluded bedroom. She had changed out of her black funeral dress into a comfortable, ultra-expensive cashmere loungewear set. In her left hand, she perfectly balanced a steaming porcelain teacup and a matching saucer. Tucked tightly under her right arm was an unusually thick manila envelope. She approached my chair with slow, exaggerated caution, treating me like a fragile antique that might shatter into a million pieces at any moment. "I brought you some hot chamomile tea," she said, gently placing the cup on the small mahogany side table right next to my supposedly weak right arm. "You've hardly eaten a thing all day. Matthew and I are both so worried about your blood pressure. You really need to drink all of this. It will help soothe your frayed nerves and help you get some much-needed deep sleep tonight." I looked closely at the steaming tea, then up at her meticulously painted face. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, using a professionally raspy voice, letting my vocal cords sound frail, weak, and elderly. "You're so thoughtful to check on an old man. I'm just so exhausted. I feel like there's a total void in my chest right now." She forced a tight, compassionate arc with her pale lips, but the warmth didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. She knelt gracefully beside my chair, placing her warm hand intimately on my knee. "I know you're exhausted, William," she murmured, resting her hand on my leg. "But Matthew specifically asked me to bring these important documents up for you. These are just standard probate papers regarding the estate. We just need you to sign on a few dotted lines so we can officially release the necessary funds to pay the funeral home first thing tomorrow morning." The director there was very clear that they need all payments processed before the upcoming weekend. I stared blankly at the thick envelope heavily weighing down my lap. My analytical engineer's brain immediately detected the immense weight and unnatural thickness of the papers inside. A standard probate form to release simple funeral costs did not require 40 pages of dense, complex legal text. I reached out with a deliberately trembling hand, letting my unsteady fingers hover over the paper flap. "Are you absolutely sure Matthew can't handle this until tomorrow afternoon?" I asked cautiously, my voice slightly slurred. "My vision is just too blurry without my reading glasses. I really don't think I can read through this complex text right now." Sarah patted my knee firmly, her grip tightening just enough to seem insincere. "Oh, you absolutely don't need to read through all of them tonight," she insisted fluently, maintaining her flawless disguise. "Matthew already read through them from start to finish this afternoon. These are all just standard boilerplate documents required by the state of Illinois. We've marked the specific signature lines with little yellow sticky notes, so it's incredibly simple for you. Just sign where the bright arrows point. Drink your hot tea and go straight to sleep. Matthew will take responsibility for filing all the paperwork at the downtown courthouse first thing in the morning. You just need to rest your brain and leave all the heavy lifting to us." She stood back up, casually smoothing out a tiny, invisible wrinkle on her expensive cashmere top. "Please drink the tea while it's hot, William. It has a very special herbal blend I bought from the organic market downtown. It works wonders for severe anxiety and panic stress. I promise you'll feel much better when you wake up tomorrow morning." I reached out with violently shaking fingers, slowly lifting the delicate porcelain cup from the matching saucer. I brought it to my lips, blowing lightly against the black surface. Steam rose in curls, carrying the sweet floral scent of chamomile, but hidden underneath. My sharp senses easily detected a faint, bitter, unnatural chemical odor. It was incredibly subtle but undeniable. I took a tiny, completely fake sip, letting the hot liquid touch my bottom lip, but didn't swallow a drop. "Very delicious," I whispered, placing the cup back on the saucer with a clumsy, loud clatter. "Thank you so much for the tea. I'll sign the papers now so Matthew can be ready." Sarah beamed, clearly excited that her twisted manipulation seemed to be working. "I won't bother you anymore," she said, slowly retreating toward the open door. "Just leave the envelope on the nightstand once you've signed everything. Good night, William. Try to find some peace tonight." The heavy wooden door shut with a click, sealing me into the dim room. I immediately grabbed the porcelain cup, moved silently across the bedroom, and poured the entire liquid with the chemical additives directly into the dark soil of a fern plant. Then, I pulled my reading glasses from my shirt pocket and tore open the thick envelope. The documents had absolutely nothing to do with funeral costs. It was a comprehensive, durable power of attorney with an incredibly aggressive design, aimed at granting Matthew complete, unrestricted access to all of my personal bank accounts. But the most chilling discovery was a permanent medical proxy clause, which gave him the absolute legal right to lock me away in a mental health facility. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling like hours had passed, listening intently to the heavy silence of the house. The rhythmic icy rain continued to lash against my bedroom window, creating a perfect wall of static sound that masked all my movements. Downstairs, the low, conspiratorial whispers between Matthew and Sarah finally stopped. I heard the guest room door click shut, followed by a heavy tranquility that only comes when people are certain they have successfully buried a problem. They thought I was unresponsive to the world, believing I had drifted into a chemically induced sleep from the tea I had just dumped into the fern. They thought their extensive power of attorney and medical proxy clauses were safe in my hands, just waiting for a broken old man to sign his name in the morning. I threw off the heavy wool blanket and stood up. My joints ached, a physical manifestation of the massive grief and betrayal wrapped around my chest, but my mind was crystal clear. This time I didn't reach for my cane. I walked barefoot across the cold floor, stepping on the structural joints of the floorboards with absolute engineer-grade precision, ensuring not a single board would groan. I opened my bedroom door and slipped into the pitch-black hallway, like a shadow seeping into a collapsed building. I crept into Diane's ruined office, silently closing the door behind me. The room was filled with the smell of dust, overturned wood, and damp air leaking in from the slightly cracked doorframe. I didn't dare turn on the desk lamp. Instead, I pulled out my phone, using the faint gray glow of the screen to guide my eyes across the aftermath Matthew had left behind. Files were scattered everywhere, client portfolios discarded like worthless trash, but Matthew was too careless. He was a financial planner driven by sudden, panicked greed, not a trained structural engineer who knew how to find the invisible load-bearing points in an environment. He had only looked in the obvious places, tearing apart the filing cabinets and ripping open drawers. He had completely missed the foundation. I walked over to the tall mahogany bookshelf against the far wall. I bypassed the empty slots where the binders had been pulled out. I reached behind the back of the third shelf, counting down 5 rows from the top, exactly where the heavy architectural design dossiers were kept. My fingers brushed a small, hidden magnetic latch attached to the back of the wood. With a soft click, a fake back panel behind the books popped out an inch. I reached into the narrow, dark cavity, my breath catching in my throat. The space was completely empty. Diane's black leather ledger was gone. That book was her absolute sanctuary. As an assistant who had been trusted by Vincent Caldwell for 20 years, she used that ledger to manually record every off-the-books transaction, every secure encryption password, and every private offshore routing number for Caldwell Investments. It was her ultimate insurance policy, a physical backup of a vast digital empire. She had explicitly told me that if that ledger left her hands, it meant the entire structure of Caldwell Investments was being targeted. Matthew and Sarah had clearly found it before I caught them. That was the specific red folder Matthew had been panic-stricken to hide behind his back. Cold sweat trickled down my neck. The truth hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't stumbled upon her files after Diane died. They had been planning this theft while Diane was still alive. I knelt amid the scattered files, my hands moving with urgent, focused speed. I began cross-referencing the remaining financial statements Matthew deemed useless and left behind. I picked up Diane's personal bank folders, her corporate credit card bills, and the internal wire transfer logs for Caldwell Investments that she had printed out over the past 3 months. I turned the phone screen's brightness down to a sliver of light to illuminate the rows of numbers, dates, and bank routing numbers. As a structural engineer, I had spent 40 years identifying anomalies in massive datasets, looking for that single decimal error that could cause an entire skyscraper to come crashing down. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the fatal fracture in the numbers. A printed corporate ledger sheet from Caldwell Investments recorded a massive wire transfer. Exactly $8 million had been moved out of Vincent Caldwell's primary liquidity reserve account. The destination was an offshore entity called Vanguard Luxury Holdings, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. But it wasn't the destination that stopped my heart. It was the timestamp of the transaction. The $8 million had been cleared and transferred at exactly 10:00 a.m. on Monday morning. My hand started to shake violently, the paper rattling in my grip. I forced myself to stare at the digital clock on my phone, rechecking the date on the document. Monday morning at 10:00 a.m., while Diane had collapsed on our kitchen floor at exactly 4:00 p.m. that same Monday afternoon. The invisible dots connected in my mind, forming a picture of absolute horror. Vincent's massive multi-million-dollar wire transfer happened exactly 6 hours before my wife suffered a sudden, fatal heart attack. This wasn't a standard case of opportunistic corporate fraud. This was a cold-blooded, brutal execution. Diane was a woman with a fanatical insistence on professional integrity. There was absolutely no way in this world she would have authorized the transfer of $8 million in illegal funds to a luxury fashion shell company while Vincent was still alive. She must have discovered the transfer. She saw the anomaly on her office monitor, printed out the evidence, and brought it home in that red folder. She must have realized that her own son, Matthew, had used his high-level security clearance as a consulting financial planner for Caldwell Investments to steal her biometric passwords to authorize the theft. She confronted him, or she was about to confront him, and then, exactly 6 hours later, her heart mysteriously stopped. I slumped back against the mahogany desk, the air completely sucked out of my lungs. The grief that had been a dull ache for days suddenly turned into a roaring furnace of pure rage. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with terrifying mathematical precision. Matthew and Sarah didn't want to pay for the funeral out of love. They needed to ensure they got that power of attorney and secured my legal signature on those extensive probate documents tonight, so they could permanently lock away that $8 million before Vincent Caldwell completed his internal audit. And the medical proxy clause was their insurance policy. If I started asking the right questions about the medication in Diane's cabinet, they could just dump me in an asylum. I held that wire transfer sheet tightly against my chest, listening to the relentless gale howling outside. My own son had looked at his mother's 45 years of dedication and decided she was completely expendable. He looked at me and thought I was just an ignorant, elderly lamb waiting to be slaughtered, easily sedated with medication. They thought they were the masterminds of a perfect crime. But they completely forgot who had built the very foundation they were standing on. I stood up, my posture straighter than it had been in years, my eyes locked on the dark hallway. The structure of this family had completely rotted away, and I was going to be the one to systematically tear it down. I left the sanctuary of Diane's office, pulling the heavy door shut until the latch clicked. I stood in the dark hallway, listening to the house. The clock downstairs chimed softly, marking 2:00 a.m. Rain hammered against the exterior siding, masking any sound I made. My brain was operating with cold clarity. I had the corporate ledger sheet. I knew $8 million had been siphoned from Vincent Caldwell's reserves into an offshore ghost entity called Vanguard Luxury Holdings. But I still needed the physical bridge. I needed specific evidence linking my son and daughter-in-law to that specific account. Matthew was arrogant, but he was also lazy at his core. He always believed his IQ was far superior to everyone else's. That extreme arrogance bred carelessness. If Sarah and Matthew were coordinating local transfers to secure the wealth they had just stolen, they would have a physical paper trail, deposit slips, wire confirmation receipts, temporary account numbers scribbled in haste. They wouldn't leave them out in the open, but they would definitely dispose of them. I grabbed the stair railing and started to head down. Darkness wrapped around me. Every shadow felt like an observer. I bypassed the living room and headed toward the mudroom that connected to the garage. The cold chill of the tile seeped through my thin socks. I slowly turned the bolt and pushed open the heavy steel door. The air inside was bone-chillingly cold, smelling of damp concrete, motor oil, and the pouring rain outside. I didn't turn on the overhead light. Glaring light would easily seep through the blinds and alert anyone upstairs. Instead, I grabbed a small tactical flashlight from my workbench. I clicked it on, aiming the beam strictly at the concrete floor. I swept that small circle of light toward a row of large green trash bins leaning against the far wall. Matthew had insisted on taking the trash out immediately when we had just returned from the cemetery. He claimed the kitchen smelled of rotting food and the foul odor of wilted sympathy flowers. For a son supposedly immersed in grief, prioritizing such an urgent chore on the day he buried his mother was obviously incredibly strange. Now, the reason was glaringly obvious. He needed to destroy the evidence. I walked up to the bins and lifted the heavy lid. Inside were 3 black trash bags tied with tight knots. I grabbed the top bag, hauled it out, and carried it to my workbench. I took a sharp utility knife from my toolbox and sliced through the thick plastic down the center of the bag. The bag spilled ordinary trash onto the stained boards. paper towels soaked in coffee grounds, empty takeout containers. I rummaged through the damp mess with my bare hands, completely disregarding the filth. I was hunting for that structural flaw. I dug deeper and felt a dense lump of paper at the very bottom of the bag. I yanked it out. It was a massive handful of roughly shredded documents. Matthew hadn't used the industrial shredder in Diane's office because the noise would have drawn my attention. Instead, he had simply ripped several pages into jagged, vertical strips. It was a rough, hurried attempt to destroy financial records. I swept the remaining trash aside and spread the torn strips of paper across the wide surface of my workbench. I dragged over a heavy stool, sat down, and turned on my small work light. The focused beam illuminated a chaotic puzzle made of numbers, barcodes, and corporate logos. Over the next hour, the freezing temperature in the garage completely vanished. I was no longer a grieving husband. I was a structural engineer analyzing a catastrophic failure. I grabbed a roll of clear tape and began the agonizing process of reconstructing the shredded paper. I matched the torn edges, aligning the blue ink lines of bank logos and the rigid black text of routing numbers. My hands, which had been shaking violently just hours before, were now steady as stone. The precision required for this task compressed my boiling rage into a cold, highly concentrated core. Slowly, the jagged strips started to piece together a coherent picture. The first document I successfully taped back together was a registration confirmation issued by the state of Delaware. The company listed was Vanguard Luxury Holdings. The registered agent was a generic corporate services firm, but the secondary contact information was glaringly familiar. It listed a private post office box in downtown Chicago. It was the exact same P.O. box Sarah used to receive her high-end fashion deliveries. I continued working, my focus narrowed to one sharp, fatal point. Do you have everything you need to proceed with your investigation, or would you like to discuss the next logical step in your plan? The second file was much harder to piece together. The strips were thinner, the text smaller. I spent 20 agonizing minutes aligning those rows of numbers. When I smoothed the last piece of tape over the paper, the truth hit me with absolute, undeniable certainty. It was an international wire transfer receipt from a private offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. The sender was Vanguard Luxury Holdings. The receiving account was a newly opened domestic line of business credit. The name of the receiving entity was printed in bold, undeniable black ink. It was the official corporate registration name for Sarah's boutique. The exact amount transferred was $8 million. They hadn't just stolen the money and left it in an offshore account. They were actively funneling the entire stolen fortune back into the United States through Sarah's failing business to launder it. They were using her legitimate retail storefront as a massive hub for money laundering. These stolen funds would be categorized as a sudden influx of private investment capital. Matthew had perfectly engineered the money flow to ensure the cash would eventually land safely in their joint account. I stared down at the reconstructed documents resting under the harsh glare of the work light. The evidence was irrefutable. My son and daughter-in-law had systematically robbed my wife's billionaire employer, murdered the woman who gave Matthew life, and now they were waiting impatiently for me to sign away my freedom. They were sleeping soundly in my guest room, dreaming of luxury cars, expensive vacations, and a lifetime of unearned wealth. They were completely convinced their heinous crimes were safely buried. A strange, terrifying calm washed over my entire body. Ever since Diane died, that suffocating, heavy grief that had anchored me to the floor evaporated completely. It was gone, replaced by a crystal-clear predatory focus. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was preparing for war. I carefully collected the fully reconstructed documents and slid them into a thick plastic sleeve inside my toolbox. I folded the sleeve and tucked it securely into the tight waistband of my trousers. I clicked off the work light, letting the garage sink back into the freezing dark. I walked back toward the mudroom door, my steps silent and firm. The structural integrity of my family had been completely destroyed, its foundation nothing but ash and blood. I was going to let Matthew and Sarah believe they had won. I was going to let them stand triumphantly on a new foundation built from stolen millions. And then, I was going to detonate the ground directly beneath their feet. Morning light crawled through the gaps in the blinds, casting pale lines across my bed. I hadn't slept a wink. As I walked down the stairs, I deliberately slowed my pace. I leaned on the banister, letting out a groan as I reached the bottom. When the sound of my cane hitting the tile echoed, Matthew and Sarah, who were in the kitchen, immediately went quiet. "Morning, Dad," Matthew said, pulling out a chair. "How did you sleep? You look pale as a sheet." I pressed my hand to my chest, letting my breathing become shallow to simulate real physical distress. "I feel terrible, Matthew," I whispered. "My chest is very tight. I called my cardiologist. His receptionist agreed to fit me in for an EKG at 10:00. Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Matthew. The prospect of my physical collapse fit perfectly with their malicious script. But this, Matthew played the part of the concerned son. "Dad, you're in no state to drive," Matthew insisted, reaching for his car keys. "Let me drive you. I can wait there." I raised a trembling hand, refusing his offer. "No, Matthew," I said. "I need to go alone. Your mother and I always drove to that clinic together. I just need a quiet space. Please stay here and look after the house. I'll call and tell you the results." Leaving the house to him was as good as giving him hours of uninterrupted time to tear apart the hidden compartments he had missed yesterday. He put down the keys, putting on an act of reluctant but obedient resignation. "Of course, Dad," he said softly. "Take as long as you need. We aren't going anywhere." I walked toward my sedan, moving with deliberately slow motions until I closed the heavy car door. The very second the engine roared to life, my trembling stopped completely. I merged onto the highway and drove straight to the Caldwell Investments headquarters in downtown Chicago. The building was like an intimidating fortress. I parked in the VIP garage and took the private elevator straight to the executive floor. Vincent Caldwell was waiting for me in his corner office. Vincent was a billionaire who had built his empire on pure talent. Today, his face was etched with deep rage. "William," Vincent said, skipping the small talk as he locked the door behind me. "Thank God you made it out safely. Did they suspect anything?" I shook my head, pulled the plastic sleeve from my coat pocket, and laid the paper scraps flat on the wooden desk. "They think I'm checking my heart," I answered calmly. "I found these in the garage trash bin this morning." Matthew and Sarah routed a full $8 million directly into Sarah's boutique account through a shell company in the Caribbean. Vincent stared down at the jagged strips of paper. He didn't look surprised, only deeply confirmed. "I knew it," Vincent hissed, slamming his fist onto the desk. "I spent the entire night running a shadow audit on the host. They bypassed our secondary firewalls completely, William, and I know exactly how they did it." I sat in the leather chair opposite him, hands folded over my cane. "Tell me," I said quietly. Vincent paced his office. Diane was the only person with the specific biometric passwords authorized for a transfer of that magnitude. Someone physically cloned her security credentials. They copied her digital fingerprint and her voice authorization protocols. Pulling off a hack of that level without triggering a federal alert requires an incredibly deep understanding of financial networks. "Matthew is a senior financial planner," I stated, feeling the cold reality sink deep into my bones. "He understands the architecture of corporate banking systems very well. He knows which invisible wires to cut." "Exactly," Vincent continued. He used his expertise to cover the initial breach. He scheduled the illegal transfer to execute exactly 6 hours before Diane suffered her fatal collapse. Diane was too smart, William. She noticed the pending anomalies on her terminal. She confronted him. I'm absolutely certain of it, and Matthew realized she was going to expose his actions. My chest tightened, grief and escalating rage intertwining. Why haven't you called the police yet, Vincent? I asked. Since we have the evidence, why hide in the shadows? Because if I involve federal authorities right now, the news of the $8 million being stolen will leak to the media within an hour. Vincent explained. The stock market would panic. My clients would pull their funds, and Matthew would immediately freeze the offshore accounts and move the money to an untraceable crypto wallet. If we act blindly, the money will be gone forever and he'll walk away scot-free. We need to set a trap he can't escape. We need to completely destroy his financial safety net before he can be put in a cage. Then what do? I leaned forward asking. Vincent pressed a hidden button under his desk. The heavy oak paneling on the other side of the room slid open seamlessly, revealing a hidden office space. A woman stepped into the light. She was tall, wearing a sharp gray suit, and her piercing blue eyes radiated an aura of absolute, calculating authority. She had a sleek silver laptop tucked under her arm. William, this is Melissa, Vincent introduced. She's my private head of security. Before joining my firm, she was a forensic accountant for 15 years and served as a lead investigator for the FBI. She specializes in dismantling organized financial crime rings. Melissa stepped forward, offering an incredibly firm handshake. William, she said, her voice completely devoid of warmth. I am deeply sorry for the unfortunate passing of your wife. Diane was an amazing woman. I assure you, we are going to tear down everything your son has built, and we are going to make him suffer immensely in the process. I looked at this former federal investigator, absorbing the absolute weight of the alliance I was forming. I'm listening, Melissa, I said firmly. What is our first step? Melissa opened her laptop, placing it directly over the shredded paper scraps. Matthew and Sarah think they have all the cards because they trapped you with the threat of medical proxy, she said while her fingers danced across the keyboard. We're going to use their own bottomless greed against them. They're counting on you signing that power of attorney tonight. I want you to sign it. I frowned, gripping my cane tighter. You want me to hand over the keys to my entire life? I asked, confused. What I want you to hand over is a live grenade disguised as a key, Melissa corrected, a predatory smile flashing across her lips. I've spent the morning setting up virtual accounts that simulate your personal wealth. When Matthew tries to use that signed document to access your funds, he will, without knowing it, bridge his compromised network directly to my monitoring server. We will have legal and unrestricted permission to record every single keystroke he makes. We are going to drain his accounts, funnel that stolen $8 million back to Vincent, and leave Matthew holding a mountain of ironclad evidence of federal tax fraud. The brilliance of the strategy was undeniable. We were going to let my treacherous son dig himself a grave he couldn't escape. I nodded slowly, sealing the oath of our underground alliance. Let's destroy him, I whispered. Leaving that secret room, I felt a strange, profound clarity. Before I left, Melissa handed me a sleek, reinforced black titanium briefcase. Inside were 6 state-of-the-art microsurveillance cameras. They were incredibly tiny, no larger than a standard shirt button, equipped with high-definition lenses, infrared night vision, and encrypted wireless transmitters. Melissa explained that this was the exact specialized equipment her former department at the FBI used to monitor high-value targets in hostile environments. They didn't rely on standard home Wi-Fi networks. Instead, they broadcasted encrypted video streams directly to a secure, isolated server located in the basement of Caldwell Investments. Even with Matthew's supposed superior technical prowess, he would never be able to detect these transmissions. I placed the heavy titanium case on the passenger seat of my sedan and drove back home. The rain had finally stopped, and under the heavy afternoon clouds, the suburban streets looked slick and gray. My chest didn't hurt anymore. The paralyzing grief that had threatened to swallow me whole just 24 hours ago had been completely burned away, leaving only a cold, calculating, and absolute thirst for justice. I was a structural engineer returning to a dangerous building, carrying the tools needed to record its inevitable collapse. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Matthew and Sarah had already taken her luxury SUV. The house was deathly silent, completely devoid of their suffocating false sympathy. I walked through the front door and, out of habit, leaned heavily on my wooden cane until I realized I didn't need to maintain this pathetic charade anymore. I straightened up, letting my spine pop as it returned to its natural posture. I walked into the kitchen and found a hastily scribbled note on the granite countertop. "Dad," Matthew had written with a thick blue marker, "Sarah and I are going out to run some necessary errands and clear our heads. We'll bring home a hot dinner. Please get some rest." I scoffed under my breath, throwing the cheap piece of paper into the stainless steel sink. I knew exactly what kind of errands they were running. Armed with the absolute certainty of about to inherit $8 million in stolen corporate funds, they were already spending the money in their heads. They were out test-driving European luxury cars, picking out custom leather interiors, and celebrating their successful heist. Their shocking arrogance was their greatest weakness. They had left the house completely undefended, giving me the perfect, uninterrupted window of time I needed to turn my own home into an inescapable digital panopticon. I opened the titanium case on the kitchen island and took out the first micro camera. My engineering background made the process of this precise installation feel incredibly natural. I needed vantage points that provided maximum visibility without drawing any unnecessary attention. I moved an ornamental ceramic vase on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet and stuck the tiny black lens to the shadowy edge of the wood. It provided a wide, unobstructed overhead view that took in the entire kitchen, the breakfast area, and the hallway leading to the front door. I could clearly see the exact spot where Diane had collapsed. That painful memory fueled my precision. Next, I moved to the spacious living room. This was where Matthew and Sarah whispered about their vicious plans at night. I found a collection of family photos on the stone mantelpiece above the fireplace. Ironically, it was a silver-framed graduation photo of Matthew from university. I carefully stuck the second micro camera to the black edge of the metal frame. The lens pointed directly at the large leather sofa they usually sat on. Every word they spoke, every guilty look, and every whispered celebration of their supposed victory would be recorded with incredibly clear high-definition audio and video. I stepped back and checked my work. The tiny devices were completely invisible to the naked eye. The hunter had officially set the trap, and the prey was completely unaware. The most critical location was Diane's office. I climbed the wooden stairs, my footsteps steady and calm. I opened the heavy door and walked into the ransacked room. Matthew had tried to clean up his mess, but the space still felt severely violated. I walked toward the tall mahogany bookshelf that had hidden the black ledger. I cautiously placed the third camera behind the edge of a heavy decorative bookend, adjusting the lens angle to capture the entire span of the mahogany desk and the heavy filing cabinets. Anyone entering this sanctuary would be recorded immediately. I placed the fourth camera in a ventilation grate near the ceiling, ensuring a secondary, redundant perspective. I knew Matthew would inevitably return to this room. He would want to carefully check the traces he left behind, looking for any loose ends before the funeral. The camera would capture his every move, providing Melissa with the final, unshakable evidence needed to seal his absolute destruction. As I meticulously adjusted those delicate microlenses, ensuring the perfect depth of field for the recording, my heart beat at a steady, rhythmic frequency. This pure mechanical operation gave me a profound sense of purpose. I was dismantling my son's empire, piece by piece. There were 2 cameras left in the protective titanium box. I thought about where they would discuss their most intimate, unguarded secrets, the guest room. I walked down the hall and slid silently into the room they were currently occupying. Their suitcases were thrown haphazardly on the floor. Sarah had scattered her expensive jewelry across the dresser. I shoved the 5th camera directly into the hollow base of a bedside lamp, pointing it straight at the center of the mattress. I took the last camera and placed it seamlessly behind the ventilation blinds of the attached guest bathroom. I demanded absolute 0 blind spots. Every corner of their private life in my house was now under tight, relentless surveillance. Once the physical installation was completely finished, I retreated to my own bedroom and took out the encrypted tablet provided by Melissa. I powered on the device and entered the complex alphanumeric password she had asked me to memorize. The black screen immediately lit up, splitting into 6 incredibly clear video feeds. I looked at the empty kitchen, the empty living room sofa, the pristine guest room, and the dark corners of Diane's office. The sensitive audio transmission captured the faint ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs, making the silence feel absolute. The acoustic clarity was simply astounding. I could even hear the faint humming of the refrigerator motor on the kitchen floor. I once again had absolute, uncompromising control of my territory. This house was no longer their safe haven. It had been permanently transformed into a technological prison, specifically designed to burn their endless greed onto digital video. The trap was fully armed and ready. I turned off the tablet and hid it securely under a loose floorboard beneath my bed. I sat in the leather armchair, pulled the blanket up, rested my hand on my cane, and waited for the return of the traders. Just past 6 o'clock, the heavy rumble of the garage door opening broke the house's silence. I sat in the armchair for several minutes, listening to the muffled sounds of their arrival. Car doors slammed shut. Heavy footsteps echoed in the mudroom. I heard the rustling of paper bags and their low, smug voices clearly penetrating the floorboards. They were back from their shopping spree, completely unaware that the walls were now watching their every move. I leaned forward, picked up my wooden cane, and practiced my trembling grip. I forced my shoulders to hunch forward, letting a sense of feigned, exhausting weight settle deep into my bones. I shuffled out of the bedroom and began my incredibly slow, painful descent down the wooden stairs. When I reached the kitchen, the rich aroma of roasted chicken and garlic mashed potatoes filled the air. Matthew was standing by the granite island, pouring expensive red wine into 2 crystal glasses. Sarah was transferring takeout food onto our fine china plates. The sheer brazenness of their family performance was simply outrageous. They had spent the entire afternoon using stolen money to buy luxury cars, and now they were playing house. I tapped my cane heavily against the tile floor. Matthew turned around immediately, replacing his relaxed demeanor with a mask of deep, fatherly concern. He put down the wine bottle, rushed over, and placed a supportive hand under my elbow. "Dad, you should have given us a call," Matthew said smoothly, guiding me forward. "We would have put the food on a tray and brought it up for you. How are you feeling? Did you manage to sleep for a bit?" I let out a weak, shallow sigh, letting my head hang low. "I tried, Matthew," I whispered, letting my voice tremble perfectly. "But every time I close my eyes, I only see your mother. Without her, this house feels terrifyingly cold. My brain just keeps going in circles. I don't seem to be able to remember even simple things today." Sarah walked over, wiping her clean hands with a dish towel. Her face was a picture of perfect sympathy, but I could clearly see the glow of victory dancing in her pale blue eyes. "Oh, William," she said gently, her voice dripping with fake, vicious sympathy. "This is completely normal. Grief is so exhausting. It plays terrible tricks on a person's brain. You just need a hot meal and someone to keep you company. We're right here with you." I let them pull out a chair and gently help me sit down. The dining room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of the chandelier. Directly above us, seamlessly hidden in the decorative crown molding, one of Melissa's micro cameras was capturing the entire scene in high-definition quality. I stared at the steaming plate of food placed in front of me, my hand shaking so violently that my fork clattered against the china plate. Matthew sat opposite me, sipping his wine with deliberate casualness. "So, Dad," he started, his tone surprisingly like small talk, "did you manage to take a quick look at those files Sarah brought up for you earlier? The probate forms for the funeral home director. We really need to get them filed first thing tomorrow morning to avoid any delays in the funeral service." I blinked slowly, looking up at him with wide, empty eyes. Before speaking, I let my mouth hang slightly open for a moment. "Files?" I asked, somewhat slurred. "What files, Matthew? My brain is just a thick fog right now. Did Sarah bring me something? I thought she only brought me tea." A fleeting flash of irritation crossed Matthew's face, but he quickly suppressed it. He glanced at Sarah, and Sarah gave him a tiny, reassuring nod. The camera above us recorded this silent, self-satisfied exchange. They genuinely believed that under the severe pressure of Diane's passing, my cognitive functions were rapidly declining. "Yes, Dad," Matthew said, leaning forward and raising his volume, as if speaking to a dull child. "The manila envelope, the legal release forms for the estate. We need your signature so we can pay for Mom's arrangements." "Oh, that envelope," I muttered, rubbing my forehead with a trembling hand. "Yes, I remember. I'm sorry, Matthew. I looked at those papers, but the legal jargon inside was just too confusing. My vision kept blurring. There were so many clauses about bank accounts and power of attorney. That didn't look like a simple funeral receipt. I got a little confused, so I just put it in my drawer." Sarah's smile froze, her fingers gripping the stem of her wine glass tightly. "William," she said sweetly, "you don't need to read the difficult parts. Those are all just standard bureaucratic procedures of the state. They always write things in an incredibly complex way to justify their high legal fees. We just want to protect you, so you don't have to deal with those greedy lawyers right now." I sighed heavily, picked up a piece of chicken with my fork, but let it fall back onto the plate. "You're right, Sarah. You're both so capable. I really don't know what I would do without you. For 40 years, your mother handled all our finances. She kept everything organized in that little black ledger of hers. By the way, have you found it? I can't seem to remember where she put it." The temperature in this dining room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Matthew froze completely, his wine glass held in midair. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her breathing suddenly becoming shallow. I still kept my gaze blankly fixed on my plate, playing the part of the innocent, confused widower, but my peripheral vision caught every microsecond of their extreme fear reaction. The camera above was capturing gold standard footage. "A black ledger?" Matthew finally asked, forcing out a light, dismissive chuckle. "I don't think I've seen any black ledger, Dad. Mom had so many files. She might have thrown it away a long time ago. Are you sure you're not confusing it with an old address book?" I slid the plastic bottle securely into the clear evidence bag and sealed the top with a firm, decisive motion. This tiny plastic cylinder was, quite literally, the murder weapon. This was the irrefutable physical evidence that would perfectly corroborate his bone-chilling midnight confession. I tucked the sealed bag deep into the inner pocket of my coat, feeling its heavy weight pressing directly against my steadily beating heart. I carefully closed the mirror cabinet door, perfectly restoring the bathroom to a spotless, undisturbed state. I walked back to the master bedroom and sat heavily in my favorite leather armchair. The massive grandfather clock downstairs chimed softly, indicating exactly 3:00 a.m. I had 3 long hours before the sun finally rose over the quiet Chicago suburbs. I used this remaining time to rehearse every single step of the brutal confrontation to come. I strictly reviewed the complex sequence of the financial trap Melissa had professionally coded into my tablet. I analytically examined the precise wording I would use when I confronted Matthew at the kitchen table. I desperately needed him to feel completely safe, to feel absolutely triumphant, until the very last second when the invisible steel jaws of the trap slammed shut, clamping down tightly on his arrogant neck. I vividly imagined the extreme panic that would cross his face when he finally realized his supposedly demented father had completely intellectually crushed him. I brilliantly pictured Sarah's inevitable, hysterical panic when she finally understood that her failing boutique was about to be forcibly seized by federal agents before noon. This pure, unadulterated anticipation of their total financial and personal destruction effortlessly provided fuel for my physical stamina, keeping me completely awake and hyper-alert during the darkest hours of the long, lonely night. The intense storm outside finally began to calm, the pouring icy rain gradually weakening into a soft, rhythmic drizzle beating against the thick glass windows. The first rays of dawn slowly began to stain the distant horizon a beautiful bruised purple and a cold, calculating gray. I stood up from the leather chair and meticulously smoothed out the visible wrinkles on my dark clothing. I reached out and grabbed my wooden cane, gripping the curved wooden handle with a sense of absolute, unwavering conviction. The pathetic time of shivering in the shadows of fear had completely ended. I walked toward the wooden bedroom door and placed my hand firmly on the brass doorknob. The grief that had once paralyzed me was gone. I was fundamentally prepared to end this nightmare. I turned the handle and stepped into the hallway with the predatory elegance characteristic of a man who held all the winning cards. The floor beneath my feet didn't make a sound. I moved with an absolute architectural mastery, silent and lethal, that oversaw a controlled demolition. I walked straight toward the stairs, my brain completely focused on the imminent total destruction of my treacherous son. The horrific fact of my beloved wife's murder demanded a brutal, absolute, and final justice, and I was deeply committed to personally executing it. Every step I took toward the kitchen was a monumental step toward their total annihilation. I would eagerly sign that highly fraudulent power of attorney. I would smile warmly at them, and then I would systematically watch their lives burn to the ground. I would ensure they suffered immensely for the rest of their miserable days on Earth. Morning light pierced through the heavy storm clouds, casting a sharp, lifeless glare onto the polished hardwood floor of the hallway. I stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the curved handle of my wooden cane. I had showered, put on a dark morning suit, and meticulously adjusted my features to reflect the image of a heartbroken, frightened old man. The titanium briefcase and the amber prescription bottle were securely locked in the hidden floor safe under my bed. The digital trap was fully operational, silently transmitting every byte of data to Melissa. I only needed to ensure Matthew jumped in without reservation. I let out a loud, stuttering cough, intentionally making my shoes scrape against the wooden steps as I began my agonizingly slow descent. The rich, deep scent of fresh coffee drifted up from the kitchen. It was the exact brand Diane had loved during her life. That my son had the audacity to brew her favorite coffee the morning after admitting to murdering her ignited a fresh, searing wave of hatred in my chest. I suppressed it instantly, letting my shoulders slump and my hands tremble as I turned the corner into the breakfast area. Matthew and Sarah were already sitting quietly. They were well dressed, looking every bit the wealthy, successful couple they were desperately trying to pass themselves off as. The thick manila envelope was placed squarely in the center of the kitchen table, a pure, malicious anchor disguised as legal paperwork. Matthew stood up the moment he saw me. A tight, incredibly forced smile pulled at his face. However, there was absolutely no warmth in his eyes. They were flat, cold, and completely calculating. "Good morning, Dad," Matthew said, his voice too loud and overly cheerful. "We brewed coffee just the way you like it. Black, no sugar. Come on, sit down. We have a lot to take care of today with the funeral home director." I shuffled toward the tall wooden stool, leaning heavily on the counter as I sat down. I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the granite surface, refusing to meet his eyes. "I don't have much of an appetite, Matthew," I whispered, letting my voice tremble with feigned weakness. "My chest still feels terribly tight. I just want to rest. I want to go back to bed and lie down." Sarah pushed a steaming porcelain mug toward my trembling hands. "You need to keep your strength up, William," she cooed like a dove, her tone dripping with fake, vicious sympathy. "We just want to take all these heavy burdens off your shoulders. You've just been through a huge trauma. You clearly aren't able to think clearly." Matthew pulled the manila envelope closer and extracted a thick stack of stapled legal documents. He smoothed out the crisp white papers on the stone countertop, unscrewed the cap of a heavy silver fountain pen, and deliberately placed it next to the printed signature line. "Dad, we need to finalize this right now," Matthew announced, his cheerful disguise already beginning to crack at the edges of his face. "This is the general power of attorney we discussed yesterday. It grants me the legal authority to handle Mom's hospital bills, morgue fees, and the immediate transfer of the estate. I just need you to sign here at the bottom." I stared blankly at the silver fountain pen, pulling my hand back onto my lap as if the metal tool were terrifyingly hot. I shook my head slowly, letting a sense of deep, absolute confusion crawl over my wrinkled face. "I can't sign that, Matthew," I muttered, intentionally stuttering over the pronunciation. "I don't understand what these dense paragraphs mean. Your mother always said I must never sign any financial release forms without Vincent Caldwell's legal team reviewing them first. I need to call Vincent. I need to ask him." The mere mention of the billionaire's name was like a spark igniting a massive powder keg. Matthew slammed his hand flat onto the granite countertop, the crisp snapping sound echoing violently in the quiet kitchen. The coffee in my porcelain cup splashed over the edges, burning my knuckles. I flinched, shrinking back into my chair, playing the frightened victim perfectly. "You are not calling Vincent Caldwell," Matthew roared, leaning over the island until his face was just inches from mine. The mask of the grieving, supportive son evaporated completely, revealing the cold, sociopathic predator lurking beneath. "I'm done playing these pathetic, exhausting games with you, Dad. You are a complete paranoid. You wander around the house in the middle of the night, rambling about some non-existent black ledger. You are almost completely demented." I widened my eyes and let out a short, pathetic gasp. "Matthew, please," I whimpered, raising a trembling hand to cover my face. "You're scaring me. Why are you yelling at me like this?" "I'm yelling because you are a stubborn, useless old fool who refuses to accept reality," Matthew shouted, his face turning an unsightly, lifeless dark red. "Mom is dead. She's gone. And you are completely incapable of managing a multi-million-dollar estate. You don't even know what day of the week it is. If you don't pick up that pen and sign this document right now, I'm going to turn your life into an absolute living hell." Sarah stepped forward, pressing herself tightly against him, arms crossed tightly over her silk blouse. "You really should listen to your adult son, William," she added, her voice cold and completely devoid of pity. "We've already spoken to a highly respected medical professional. We described your severe memory loss, your debilitating paranoia, and your sudden loss of ability to care for your basic daily needs. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, forcing a single tear to spill over my lower eyelid. Matthew grabbed the fountain pen from the countertop and shoved it violently into my trembling hand. "I'm talking about a state-appointed guardianship, Dad," Matthew hissed, his words dripping with pure, unadulterated malice. "If you refuse to sign this voluntary legal proxy document, I'm going straight to a judge this afternoon. I will swear under oath in court that you have completely lost your mind due to severe traumatic grief. Before the sun sets, I'll have you legally declared mentally incompetent." I stared at him, letting the absolute horror of his threat hang heavily in the tense, stagnant air. "You can't do this to your own father," I cried, my voice cracking at just the right moment. "You can't lock me away." "You can watch me do it," Matthew threatened, his deep eyes locking onto mine with an absolute, unwavering cruelty. "I will strip away every single legal right you possess. I'll have you forcibly dragged out of this house and locked away in a miserable state-run psychiatric nursing home. You will spend the rest of your pathetic life staring at a blank wall, injected with heavy sedatives, surrounded by strangers." Sarah leaned closer, smiling. "When you're rotting in a clinical cage, we will be living here enjoying everything you built. Don't force us to take that ugly road. Sign the paper. Don't get in our way." They were actively extorting a fragile old man. I looked down at the documents. The digital trap was waiting perfectly. I stared at the crisp white papers placed on the cold granite countertop, letting my breathing become rapid and irregular. The threat of a state mental institution hung in the murky air, a cruel psychological weapon wielded mercilessly by my own flesh and blood. I forced my lower lip to tremble pathetically, letting a stream of hoarse, broken sobs tear from my throat. I closed my eyes tightly, squeezing hot, salty tears down my wrinkled cheeks. I let them see a fragile man completely collapsing, a defeated father whose spirit had been violently crushed by his son's cruel heel. "Oh, Matthew," I wept, burying my wet face completely in my noticeably trembling hands. "Please don't do this to me. I can't go to that terrible place. I'll do whatever you want. Just promise you'll let me stay safely in my own home. Let me stay where my Diane lived." Matthew let out a heavy, incredibly dismissive sigh, and his broad shoulders instantly relaxed into an incredibly arrogant, victorious posture. He slid the heavy silver fountain pen closer to my stiff elbow. "Then stop making things so incredibly difficult, Dad," he said in a flat tone, completely devoid of any remaining human warmth. "Sign the proxy document. It really is for your own good." I slowly took my trembling hands away and wiped my tear-streaked face roughly with the dark sleeve of my wool suit jacket. I reached blindly for his silver fountain pen, but intentionally let my clumsy fingers pretend to make a mistake, knocking the expensive metal off the smooth countertop. It clattered crisply against the hard tile floor and quickly rolled under the massive kitchen island, beyond my reach. "I am so sorry," I muttered, tapping my left chest pocket with a frantic, completely uncoordinated and terrified rhythm. "My old hands are shaking so terribly. I have my own pen. I always carry my own pen." I pulled a sleek, incredibly nondescript black ballpoint pen directly from my inner silk pocket. It looked completely ordinary, exactly like the cheap, disposable office supplies you might grab at any local branch of a commercial bank. But it was absolutely not ordinary. When Melissa handed it to me yesterday afternoon, she had a cold, incredibly terrifying and knowing smile on her face. The special ink contained in that thin plastic refill was an extremely volatile chemical compound, specifically designed for covert espionage. Once physically applied to paper, this thick black liquid would stubbornly remain completely legible for exactly 2 hours. After that precise window of time, it would evaporate completely, leaving absolutely no residue, no physical indentation, and no trace whatsoever. Those heavy legal papers would simply return to being completely blank, unsigned scrap paper. I pressed the top of this special pen and aimed the sharp ballpoint tip at the first signature line on the heavily bound legal document. My hand shook violently, an Oscar-caliber physical performance, playing a terrified, incompetent elder permanently signing away his absolute personal autonomy. I pressed the rolling tip against the heavy paper, slowly, meticulously tracing my full name, William Thomas Mason. The dark synthetic ink flowed smoothly, appearing solid and unquestionably real to the completely untrained naked eye. I carefully flipped to the next page, performing another perfect, tremblingly slow signature. Matthew leaned over my right shoulder threateningly, his excited breathing incredibly short and abnormally rapid. I could even physically feel the sickening heat radiating from his unbridled greed, beating violently against my bare neck. He was like a hungry, desperate scavenger, eagerly watching a massive, unearned feast placed directly before him. Beside him, Sarah was practically trembling with pure, unadulterated anticipation. Her wide eyes traced every stroke of my moving pen. She was completely mesmerized by the dark ink, genuinely believing it was the permanent legal key to her incredibly luxurious future. I deliberately delayed this agonizing process, intentionally pausing to wipe fresh fake tears from my eyes, letting my right hand spasm and pause dramatically. I desperately wanted them to feel that agonizing suspense, to deeply savor the last fleeting moments where they believed they held absolute dominance. Finally, I flipped to the last page. The main financial authorization clause, this decisive legal mechanism that would formally grant Matthew complete, unrestricted, and immediate authority to take over my entire personal financial investment portfolio, including the heavily fortified offshore accounts holding the $8 million in stolen funds. I swallowed a loud fake sob and pressed the pen heavily for the last time, signing my name. I let the black pen slide from my weak fingers and let my heavy head hang low in complete, irrevocable defeat. "Done," I whispered weakly, pushing the stack of heavily signed documents across the smooth, cold granite surface. "You have everything now." Matthew didn't offer even a single word of comfort. He didn't pat my trembling shoulder, or even bother to pretend to care about my faked emotional collapse. He lunged forward, his eager hands grabbing the documents with a terrifying, predatory speed. He quickly flipped through the crisp papers, his deep eyes scanning every signature line to ensure I hadn't missed a single required initial signature. A huge, triumphant, and arrogant smile tore across his face, fully exposing the brief, true face of the absolute monster I had heard lurking in the shadows in last night's recording. "Perfect," Matthew announced arrogantly, tapping the heavy papers on the stone countertop to align them perfectly. Sarah let out a sharp, breathless laugh of ecstasy, reaching out to grip his suited arm tightly. "We have to leave right now, Matthew," she urged, her high-pitched voice tight with pure electrical excitement. "The head bank manager expects us at exactly 9:00 a.m. to process the immediate transfer of corporate assets. We absolutely cannot be late." Matthew nodded, sliding the highly fraudulent power of attorney directly into his expensive leather briefcase. He turned his head and looked at me briefly, his sharp expression suddenly becoming completely dismissive, his actions as if I were a useless piece of broken furniture taking up unnecessary space in his modern kitchen. "Go upstairs and rest, Dad," he commanded coldly. "We'll be out all day, effectively dealing with those tedious legal logistics. Do not open the front door for anything, and absolutely do not make any phone calls to the outside. From now on, I will be happy to handle absolutely everything." I didn't bother to look up. I just lowered my head, nodding in a silent, incredibly pathetic attitude of submission. They turned their backs on me without a care, without a second of hesitation. I listened intently as their hurried, chaotic footsteps moved quickly away down the long hallway. The heavy front door opened wide, and then was slammed shut with extreme aggression. A moment later, the massive engine of Sarah's luxury SUV roared violently to life in the concrete driveway, its heavy tires screeching slightly as they recklessly backed out and sped toward downtown Chicago. They were rushing toward that major bank branch with extreme aggression, completely consumed by that blinding, intoxicating promise of millions of unearned dollars. The suffocating silence of this completely empty house wrapped around me calmly, like a heavy, comfortable wool blanket. I sat motionless for a full 60 seconds, absolutely ensuring they had completely, undeniably left. Then I slowly raised my heavy head. That pathetic, trembling weakness completely and instantly vanished from my upright posture. I straightened my tired spine aggressively, rolled my stiff shoulders back, and a cold, incredibly deadly clarity surged into my pounding veins. I raised my hand quickly and wiped the last of the completely fake tears from my perfectly dry cheeks. I looked straight through the massive kitchen, slowly moving my unflinching gaze toward the highest point of the wooden cabinets, where the hidden micro-camera was invisibly operating in the dark shadows. I was incredibly certain that Melissa was actively watching the real-time video stream in her highly secure basement at Caldwell Investments. I gave a sharp, incredibly cold nod toward that tiny, invisible glass lens, a nod that represented absolute, unwavering readiness. The lethal bait had been successfully taken. The greedy, bloodthirsty wolves had swallowed the toxic meat whole. In just 2 hours, the dark synthetic ink on that legally binding document would evaporate completely into the air, leaving Matthew standing in front of the head bank manager like an idiot, holding a stack of blank, useless scrap paper. But more importantly, at the exact second Matthew aggressively handed over the file and eagerly tried to access my heavily fortified private accounts, his corrupt digital bridge was automatically connected directly into Melissa's waiting surveillance server. He truly thought he was walking into a bank to claim his stolen wealth. In reality, he was blindly walking into a devastating digital slaughterhouse. I sat quietly in the deafening silence of the kitchen, watching the heavy grandfather clock tick through the second hour. The encrypted tablet on the granite countertop suddenly let out a sharp, metallic trill, shattering the calm. I tapped the flashing notification icon. Melissa's crisp, professional voice immediately filled my headset. She informed me that Matthew had just arrived at the downtown branch of the International Bank. Furthermore, the brilliant digital trap had worked perfectly. The moment Matthew connected his laptop to the bank's secure network to begin the authorization process, he had, without knowing it, granted Melissa unrestricted backdoor access to the bank's internal security framework. She had successfully hijacked the high-definition audiovisual feed from the executive floor. My tablet screen fractured into a raw live broadcast from the VIP suite. I leaned forward, gripping the cold edges of the device, incredibly ready to witness the total, absolute destruction of my treacherous, murderous son. The video feed showed an ornate room, walls inlaid with rich dark mahogany, equipped with a massive polished conference table and luxurious leather executive chairs. Matthew and Sarah were leaning back casually in the center of the table, radiating a shocking aura of unearned arrogance. Sarah elegantly crossed her legs, admiring her diamond ring under the warm overhead lights, while Matthew impatiently tapped the beautiful wooden table with his expensive luxury watch. They truly believed they were standing at the absolute pinnacle of the world, untouchable, forever victorious. A senior bank manager in an impeccable charcoal suit walked into the room briskly, carrying a silver tray with premium coffee. He was fawning over them, offering obsequious apologies for a slight delay. Matthew ignored the offered coffee completely, waving his hand with extreme arrogance. He leaned back in the leather chair, striking a cold, commanding pose of a billionaire tycoon. He aggressively demanded immediate, unrestricted access to the master investment portfolio, clearly instructing the manager to immediately initiate the final transfer protocol for the offshore Cayman account. His voice echoed through my headset, heavily dripping with a mixture of sickening superiority and absolute privilege. The bank manager nodded nervously, pulling a sleek silver laptop toward himself. He explained calmly that a manual transfer of such staggering scale, especially the $8 million currently sitting securely in the Caribbean Shell Company, absolutely required a notarized power of attorney from the master account holder. Matthew let out a harsh, condescending laugh. Confidently, he reached into his designer leather briefcase and pulled out the thick manila envelope containing the power of attorney. He tossed it casually across the polished mahogany table. The envelope slid and stopped right in front of the manager. Matthew proudly declared that he held full, absolute legal authority over his father's entire estate, claiming my mental faculties had severely declined, and that he was now the sole financial guardian of the family legacy. Sarah smiled brilliantly, wrapping her hands lovingly around Matthew's arm, a sickening display of unified greed. The manager adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses politely and opened the manila envelope cautiously. He slid out the thick stack of legal documents and laid them flat under the bright halogen lights to precisely verify the necessary binding signatures. I watched the live broadcast with breathless tension, my eyes locked completely on the manager's face. He turned the first page, his thick eyebrows knitting slightly. He turned the second page, his frown instantly deepening into genuine, profound confusion. He flipped quickly through the remaining papers, his eyes scanning the bottom of every page frantically. The thick, dark layer of synthetic ink I had painstakingly applied just 2 hours earlier had performed its highly specialized chemical function perfectly. The volatile compound had completely evaporated into the atmosphere, leaving zero traces, zero residue, and zero physical indentations on the crisp white paper. The designated signature lines were completely, undeniably, and utterly blank. The manager looked up at Matthew, a look of profound confusion washing over his professional features. He politely informed Matthew that there must be some incredibly serious misunderstanding, because the critical document he provided was completely unsigned. This supposed legal proxy document was, in reality, nothing more than a thick stack of completely useless, utterly blank waste paper. Matthew let out a loud, mocking sound, a guttural, purely angry expression of displeasure. He aggressively leaned across the wide mahogany table, viciously snatching the papers back from the manager's trembling hands. He viciously berated the manager for being completely blind, aggressively jabbing his stiff index finger straight at the bottom of the final page. But the moment Matthew looked down, his arrogant, furious expression shattered instantly and irrevocably. The warmth drained completely from his face, turning him into a sickly, terrifying pale gray in an instant. His jaw dropped completely to his chest. He frantically flipped the thick papers over and over, his sweaty hands starting to tremble violently. The undeniable, staggering reality of white paper and black ink, now just white paper, hit him with the force of a devastating, crushing physical blow. Sarah leaned heavily on his broad shoulders, her smooth brow twisted in sudden, sharp, electric panic. She screeched, asking exactly where something had gone horribly wrong, practically screaming at him as he stared at the empty paper. Matthew ignored her completely, his heavy breathing becoming incredibly rough and short. He grabbed his silver laptop frantically, desperately trying to bypass the required physical authorization by aggressively accessing the digital bridge he had secretly built. But as his trembling fingers tapped the keyboard, the screen flickered a blinding, utterly merciless crimson red. Melissa had perfectly executed the brilliant link in this devastating trap. Through my hidden headset, I clearly heard the digital alarm emitting a rapid, harsh synthesized trill, echoing wildly from Matthew's completely compromised machine. He stared dead at the screen in pure, unadulterated terror as a massive, bold black warning banner locked his glowing screen aggressively. Access DENIED. Federal investigation initiated. Assets permanently frozen. Matthew began violently slamming his clenched fists against the smooth keyboard, screaming at the completely bewildered bank manager like a madman, demanding he fix the server immediately. He frantically accused the terrified manager of playing treacherous, illegal tricks. His once confident voice was completely disconnected, cracking pathetically under the massive, crushing weight of his rapidly collapsing reality. Sarah stumbled backward violently, clutching her open mouth with her violently trembling hands as that truly terrifying realization finally dawned on her completely. Their stolen $8 million, their incredibly luxurious future, and their previously perceived absolute dominance were evaporating completely and permanently before their terrified eyes. The grand illusion of their total victory had shattered violently into a million jagged pieces, leaving them completely naked and incredibly exposed in the cold, extremely cruel light of their undeniable, thoroughly documented financial crimes. Matthew stood up abruptly, his expensive leather chair falling backward violently. He frantically grabbed the completely blank papers, aggressively preparing to launch a physical tirade against the terrified manager. But before he could utter a single syllable of anger, the heavy mahogany door of the VIP suite was kicked open violently. The wooden door crashed brutally against the interior wall with a deafening crack. A team of fully armed federal agents flooded into the luxurious room immediately, surrounding the massive conference table in an instant, barking uncompromising orders. The fully armed federal agents moved with terrifying, synchronized precision. They instantly formed an impenetrable perimeter around the massive mahogany conference table, their dark tactical gear contrasting sharply with the ornate cream-colored walls of the bank suite. The terrified bank manager practically threw himself against the far wall, immediately raising his trembling hands in surrender. Matthew and Sarah froze completely in their luxurious leather chairs, their mouths wide open in pure shock. The grand illusion of their perfect crime masterpiece was shattering violently into a million jagged pieces before their wide-open eyes. Before Matthew could even attempt to utter a coherent syllable of protest, the federal agent stepped slightly to the side, clearing a path in the wide doorway. Vincent Caldwell walked into the room first. The billionaire radiated an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority, his chiseled features carved into a mask of pure, vengeful rage. Melissa followed closely behind him, her face completely cold as she walked straight toward the compromised silver laptop on the table. Then I walked through that door. I didn't stumble. I didn't lean on that wooden cane. I left the carved wood against the outer doorframe, straightened my spine, held my head incredibly high, and walked into the brightly lit VIP suite. The pathetic, trembling weakness I had meticulously performed all morning vanished completely. I looked straight at my son, my gaze carrying the cold, crushing weight of absolute vengeance. Matthew stared at me, his frantic brain completely unable to process the profound physical transformation occurring before him. "Dad," he stammered, his voice weak, completely stripped of his previous arrogance. "Dad, what happened? These agents just burst in. Tell them this is a huge misunderstanding. We were just filing estate paperwork." "There is absolutely no misunderstanding, Matthew," I replied, my voice echoing through the quiet, tense room with crystal-clear resonance. "The only misunderstanding is that you assumed I was an ignorant, demented old man who would blindly hand over the keys to his entire life. The ink in that pen was a highly volatile synthetic compound. The signatures vanished exactly as they were designed to. At the precise moment you attempted to bridge the laptop to this secure bank host, you triggered the Federal Alert Melissa, designed specifically for you. Melissa's gaze didn't leave the keyboard as she locked down the digital perimeter. The $8 million located in your Cayman shell company has been completely frozen and is being actively rerouted back to Caldwell Investments' primary reserves, she stated coldly. Your corrupt digital footprint has been recorded in full. Sarah let out a high-pitched, terrified whimper, desperately clutching the edge of the polished mahogany table, her legs turning completely soft beneath her. Matthew shook his head frantically, his face covered in cold sweat, desperately trying to construct a new, plausible lie. This is a huge misunderstanding, he pleaded, the desperation in his voice escalating. Vincent, please listen to me. Diane wanted me to manage these funds. She authorized the transfer. My father is just confused by grief. He doesn't understand the complexities of corporate finance. I took a step forward, completely ignoring the pathetic, futile struggle he was making to save himself. I reached into the inner pocket of my dark morning suit jacket and pulled out a small, heavy digital playback device. I placed it deliberately in the very center of the massive conference table, the black metal making a crisp clatter against the polished wood. Your mother understood absolutely everything perfectly, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, uncompromising calm. She understood the absolute abyss of your greed. She knew you were stealing millions of dollars. She drafted massive changes to her will, completely disinheriting you and leaving the Montana estate to a children's hospital. She was planning to expose you, Matthew, and we all know exactly how you decided to handle that threat. I pressed the play button on the device. The flawless high-definition audio filled the empty bank suite with absolute, terrifying clarity. Matthew's own voice echoed off the ornate walls, capturing perfectly the midnight conversation he had with Sarah in the dark kitchen. I handled it. The voice of my son in the recording rang out viciously. I swapped her heart medication with a lethal dose of beta blockers. I crushed the pills, dissolved them in her coffee, and watched her drink every single drop. The coroner ruled it as a completely natural heart attack because she had a history of mild arrhythmia. There was no reason to conduct a toxicology screening. We're safe. After the recording ended, the absolute dead silence that followed was incredibly suffocating. The bank manager let out a terrified, stifled gasp, sliding down the wall in pure shock. Vincent Caldwell closed his eyes, his jaw set with intense, righteous rage. The federal agents instantly tightened their grips on their weapons, their eyes locked dead on Matthew, not bothering to hide their deep disgust. Matthew stood there completely paralyzed. The remaining color drained from his face entirely, leaving a terrifyingly translucent pallor. His lips opened and closed soundlessly, completely unable to organize even a single word to defend himself in the face of his own recorded, devastating, undeniable ironclad confession. The bulletproof trap had officially closed, crushing him completely. Sarah was the first to physically collapse. She let out an incredibly sharp, blood-curdling scream, pushing her chair violently away from the table. She scrambled backward frantically, pressing her body hard against the far wall as if Matthew had suddenly caught fire. I had absolutely nothing to do with that, she screamed hysterically, pointing a trembling, manicured finger straight at her husband. It was him. He killed her. He poisoned the coffee. I had no idea he intended to murder his own mother. He forced me to keep quiet. You have to believe me. I am completely innocent. Matthew turned his head slowly to look at the woman he had committed murder to satisfy her greed. The profound, agonizing realization that she had completely betrayed him washed over his pale face. The woman who had once encouraged his greed, The woman who had cold-bloodedly celebrated Diane's death only hours earlier was now eager to throw him to the federal wolves just to save her own pathetic skin. They were turning on each other completely, consumed entirely by the same selfishness that had driven them to steal and kill. The lead federal agent stepped forward, his heavy boots making a crisp echo on the floor. "Matthew Mason, you are under arrest for grand larceny, massive corporate wire fraud, and the premeditated murder of Diane Mason," the agent announced firmly, his voice cutting through Sarah's hysterical sobbing. "Sarah Mason, you are under arrest as an accessory to murder and a primary co-conspirator in federal financial fraud. You have the right to remain absolutely silent." Two agents moved swiftly, grabbing Matthew's shoulders and forcibly turning him around. The harsh metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking firmly onto his wrists was, to my overburdened ears, nothing short of absolute beautiful music. Two other agents aggressively secured Sarah, completely ignoring her frantic, useless pleas for mercy, pinning her hands tightly behind her back. Matthew didn't fight the federal agents. He was completely shattered, turned into a hollow shell, no longer the arrogant predator who had strode into this bank only minutes earlier. As the agents violently dragged him toward the heavy mahogany doors, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. His deep eyes met mine, churning with a pathetic, desperate plea, begging for the mercy of a father that no longer existed. "Dad," Matthew whispered, his voice trembling with pure terror, "please." I looked at my son one last time, feeling an absolute, cold, steel-like will permanently strengthening my broken heart. "You are no longer my son," I said, my voice completely steady, incredibly cold and merciless. "You are nothing more than a monster who murdered my wife. You will spend the rest of your pathetic life burning away in the ashes of your bottomless greed." I turned my back on him and faced the panoramic glass window overlooking the vast Chicago skyline. I listened to his pathetic sobbing fading away down the long hallway, watching the agents aggressively drag him and his treacherous wife out of the building, out of my life completely, forever. Justice had arrived cold, and the air was finally clean enough to breathe. I had spent a lifetime building a foundation of trust, believing blood meant loyalty. But true evil doesn't always break in with a weapon. Sometimes it sits at your dinner table, smiling, waiting for you to close your eyes. I lost the woman I loved to the boy we raised, but I refused to let her memory be buried in lies. Greed is a poison that corrodes the soul from the inside. Always trust your gut, because the most dangerous predators are often those who make you believe you are absolutely safe. If this story opened your eyes, please like and subscribe so you don't miss another truth. Have you ever discovered a dark secret hidden by someone you loved and trusted? I am reading all your comments below. Share your stories and let's uncover the truth together. Oh yes,